Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for another webinar on patents. Today, Matthew Grumbling will be talking about patent eligibility. Patent eligibility can be a major stumbling block, especially for software developers. So today you're going to delve into the history of patent eligibility, especially as it relates to software. Then there will be a discussion on how to overcome the eligibility hurdle and obtain a patent for software. If you do have questions during the presentation, feel free to chat, enter into the chat, or I can unmute you. Also, we will be recording this presentation and it will be available for whoever wants it to replay, or if you know someone who wanted to see this webinar and they missed it, we're happy to forward it. So welcome, Matthew. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And I'll start sharing my screen now.
All right.
And here we go. As Julie mentioned, my name is Matthew Grumbling, and the title of today's presentation is Patent Eligibility, a Potential Stumbling Block for Programmers and Others. You can see my email address up at the top here. That's probably the best way to get in contact with me if you have questions after, or if you just want to chat. So what we'll be talking about today, today's topics, let's see if I can pull this over to the side. There we go. Today's topics are going to be, we're going to start off with what is and isn't eligible for a patent. And then we're going to talk about, in terms of software, natural products, and laws of nature. And as the title of today's presentation suggests, we're going to spend most of our time up here in software, because that's where most of the controversy is. And it's actually, I think, where most of the patent litigation around patent eligibility comes from. It's sometimes the hardest one to deal with in terms of patent eligibility. So what is patent eligible? Well, according to 35 U.S.C. 101, which was incorporated into the 1952 Patent Act, it says whoever invents or discovers any new and useful process, machine, manufacture, or composition of matter, or any new and useful improvement thereof, may obtain a patent, therefore, subject to the conditions and requirements of this title. So it has to be a process or machine or manufacture or composition of matter, and you may get a patent for that. Now, what a patent means is you get one patent. You can't file a patent application and then 5 years later decide to file the exact same one and get a patent for exactly the same thing. You get one patent. So the key there is what is patentable or patent eligible. And according to the 1980 decision by the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, the answer is anything under the sun made by man. And that right there, made by man or made by a human being, is an important part of the patent law. It actually comes in a number of different ways, but it basically means that you can't get a patent on something that is, say, a natural product or a product or a phenomenon of nature. Even if you're the person who discovered it, the first person to articulate it, it still has to be something that's made. I mean, you have to manipulate something in order for it to be patentable, or patent eligible. So the Supreme Court over time has articulated a few exceptions to patent eligibility, and they are abstract ideas like mathematical formulas and algorithms, products of nature, and natural laws. Now, if we have time at the end, I'll talk about products of nature and natural laws. I'm going to focus here mostly on mathematical formulas and algorithms. So those natural laws, by the way, are things like, E equals MC squared, F equals MA, the sorts of things you learned maybe in physics class or chemistry class that are, they're just basically laws, the law of gravity. Now you can make a machine that takes advantage of the law of gravity. In fact, many machines do, but you can't claim the law of gravity itself. And we'll see that when we kind of get farther into this presentation. The patents on software have always been controversial. The patent term is 20 years, but your typical product life cycle for software may be a lot shorter than that. And what that means is that folks can lock up, an inventor can lock up the use of a particular type of software for a much longer time than is really maybe commercially necessary, at least in some people's view. And what also has occurred is over time, there have been a few cycles in the software business. We call these .com booms and busts, and we had one particular bubble back around 1999, 2000, where there had been a lot of software patents filed. The companies that filed them went bankrupt because they just, all the money dried up out of the capital markets. And as a result, a lot of patents ended up in bankruptcy filings. And they were picked up by, in many cases, not competitors, but non-practicing entities. And that's the polite term for them, NPEs. The less polite sorry, I'm getting a phone call. The less polite term is trolls, and that's the one you'll probably hear in the press a lot. These patent trolls, what they are is they're entities that buy up software patents. They never actually make any products from using this technology, but they find others who are or at least allegedly using these patented technologies, and they're in some cases they bully them into settlements that may or may not be warranted. So software is controversial, and if some people had their way, there would be no software patents whatsoever. Software would be, just be free range, so to speak. But there are software patents, but they have been limited over time. Now, where things got really kind of interesting was in 1998. The Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, which is the court, the Court of Appeals that is tasked with hearing all patent cases, more or less. It's 98% of patent cases, let's say, or 95% of patent cases end up going to that court because they start out as a patentee suing somebody for infringement, and they have jurisdiction over all of those. They heard a case called State Street Bank. Now, State Street Bank, that's the short name for it. There are two parties in this, and one of them had obtained a patent on a way of basically doing a business method. And the takeaway from State Street Bank is that they came up with this test that if a process that's executed on a computer produces a useful, concrete, and tangible result, then it's patent eligible. And then they went on and they reasoned that the transformation of data representing discrete dollar amounts by a machine through a series of mathematical calculations into a final share price constitutes a practical application of a mathematical algorithm. Well, that kind of started a gold rush for patents in the financial services industry. Previously, it had been presumed more or less that business methods were not eligible for patenting. And that was sort of, I would say that was the, at least the tacit understanding of almost anybody in the art. And all of a sudden, people were dreaming up ways to patent computer programs or patent, more than just computer programs, but patent methods of, say, hedging bets on Wall Street, methods of banking, things like that had previously been kept, if anything, as a trade secret. They were now filing them as patents so that they could offer, say, unique financial instruments to their customers. Well, this kind of started to lose steam around 2010. Look at that date there, that's 1998. So 12 years of patent filings had been filed. How many hundreds of thousands of patent applications have been filed during those 12 years? I can't tell you, but I know it's a large number based on that State Street Bank case. So in this case, Bilski v. Kapos, the Supreme Court looked at it and said that a procedure for instructing buyers and sellers how to protect against the risk of price fluctuations in a discrete section of the economy was not patent eligible. So this was sort of the beginning of the end for the business method patent gold rush. People who were in the industry started to realize that the gold rush was going to end eventually, and they needed to they needed to kind of rethink things. The other thing was that there was a lot of pressure being put on the legislature, on Congress, to change the law, basically to do away with software patents. I think the Supreme Court kind of stepped in and said, well, we have our own jurisprudence that we can rely on. Maybe Congress doesn't need to get involved. This really congealed in this case called Alice Corp versus CLS Bank. This was a 2014 case. And rather than just invalidating a patent and then sending it back to the Federal Circuit, in this case, the Supreme Court looked at this and said, the Federal Circuit needs some guidance. They need a test that they can look to. So they developed this two-step test for eligibility. The first step is the patent directed to an abstract idea, natural phenomenon, or a product of nature? So in Alice Corp, the question was really, is it directed to an abstract idea? And it's kind of presumed that anything that involves a computer algorithm and nothing more is an abstract idea, because you're just manipulating symbols, you're manipulating money, or you're symbols that represent money or something like that. You're manipulating data in a computer, and the presumption was that, well, you could do that in your head or on with a paper and pencil if you had enough time. And now you're just doing something that you could do with paper and pencil on a computer. So that's not patent eligible, unless step two, there's sufficient detail to ensure that the patent in practice amounts to significantly more than a patent upon the ineligible concept itself. So if yes, then it is patent eligible. So here's some statistics for you. Since 2014, when the Alice case came out, about 80% of the cases that go up to the Federal Circuit, which that have this eligibility issue in them, and in almost all of those cases, a patent is found to be ineligible. In almost all of those cases, in 80% of the cases, the Federal Circuit finds that the patent is ineligible for patenting. because it fails either step 1 or step 2 of that Alice test. So, the abstract idea problem is where most software patents fall. They sort of start out with a strike against them being software patents, and so they're kind of presumed to be abstract, and so most of them fail. Most of them don't pass step 1, and so you have to prove that there's something more there than just the abstract idea in order to overcome, in order to get your patent. And just a mathematical formula or algorithm is not eligible for patenting. Just forget about it. If somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, I have a new way of calculating, spreads in the stock market or something like that," and and that's all it does, probably not going to be patentable. Things like merely performing a calculation on a computer that can be done by hand. Also, processing of a signal. If you take one signal in, you do something to it, and you put another signal out, that's not patent eligible. Merely displaying data, collecting data, and then displaying it, not patentable, not patent eligible. And basically all business methods, hedging, settling, balancing risks, et cetera, are not going to be patent eligible. So here are some examples. I thought I'd give you some examples of cases where the patent was held to be ineligible for patenting. And here's an old one. This one is one of the telegraph patent case from 1853. And this was O'Reilly v. Morse, Morse of the Morse code fame. Morse tried to patent a process by which signs or letters may be printed at a distance by any mode if electromagnetism is used as the mode of power. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't have something that broad. And, you basically encompass the entire field there. We're not going to let you do that. As a side note, I would say that under the current law, it would fail on more than one basis of law. But the 101, the lack of patent eligibility one is one that a lot of software patents are falling on right now. Then here's another one, is a computer implemented method for converting binary coded decimal numerals into pure binary numerals. Without going into the technology, basically this was a way of taking one way that computers may express numbers and converting them into another way that they express numbers. And basically the court reasoned that you could do it on, in fact, people do this on, in paper and pencil. And so, you're basically trying to get a patent on the abstract idea itself. There's another patent that was filed. It was a computer implemented method of continuously updating alarm limits in a catalytic cracker. Now this one starts to sound a little bit less abstract, because when you're trying to crack petroleum in a catalytic cracker, you're actually doing something to something, right? You're actually manipulating molecules. That sounds pretty real. The problem here was all they were doing is they were taking in data and they were putting out data. In this case, they were taking in the data about what the temperature and the pressure was in the catalytic cracker, and then they were outputting things in alarm limits. That's not enough. Now, and we'll see later on, there's a way to make something like this patent eligible, but they didn't get it done in this particular patent. This one's pretty straightforward. A computer system for implementing an insurance scheme. That's definitely not patentable. It's a business method. and courts are going to go against that every time. Same thing with a cellular system for providing out-of-region content to a user, not patent eligible. That one actually could be a little controversial. Computer implemented methods for employing specific formulas for determining values required to manage a stable value protected life insurance policy. There you see life insurance policy, it's a business method. It's probably going to fail straight out. So another one, perform steps for guaranteeing a party's performance of an online transaction. As real world as that sounds, the fact is that it's a business method, and the courts are very, very, they don't take business methods very, very seriously when it comes to patenting. Generating financial packages, printing of a ballot, things like that, not patent eligible. And I could go on and on. This is a short list. This is a short sample of a very long list of cases where a patent has been held to be ineligible because it had an abstract idea in it, and that's all it claimed. So here's some, I thought we would give you some good news too, some that are patent eligible. And here's one, it's a process of vulcanizing rubber, which constantly monitors temperature, feeds it into a computer, and uses the Arrhenius equation continuously to recalculate the optimal curing time to determine when to open the tire press. So what's the difference between this one and the previous one where we only updated alarm limits in the catalytic cracker? Well, the real difference here is that it actually opens the tire press. There's actually something that's done automatically by the computer that that is more than just calculating and displaying data. It actually does something, something a little bit more. It's not much more, but it's just enough to get it across that patent eligibility line. This next one is interesting. It's using tabs in a spreadsheet. At one time, there were no tabs in spreadsheets, and then somebody decided to add tabs in a spreadsheet. And that patent was challenged. It was just kind of a conventional way of doing things, and the court disagreed. They said no. And while it's ubiquitous now you can't get a spreadsheet without tabs in it. At one time, that was a novel idea, and it was not conventional. And this one down here at the bottom, I don't even understand the technology, but it's a packet monitor for examining packets passing through a connection point on a computer network. And apparently what it does is it just watches data streams go by, and then it makes corrections based on what it's seeing in those data streams. That may seem pretty abstract, but there's a tangible result that comes out of it, and that is that the quality of the packets passing through is improved. So here we've got a few more of them. There's a method of archiving an item in a computer processing system by storing a reconciled object structure in the archive without substantial redundancy. Again, what looks pretty abstract there actually is saved by the fact that first off, this is not a conventional way of doing it. It actually improves the way that the archiving is carried out. I think if the claim were a method of archiving an item in a computer processing system by classifying it and then putting it in the archive, that wouldn't get it done. You have to have something more. And I think the something more here is, part of it is it's without substantial redundancy. So that's the result that got them over that patent eligibility hook or eligibility hurdle. This next one is it's a way of manipulating data in a viewable form in a computer. And again, what gets you over that hurdle is that it's an improved way of doing it. People have been making charts and graphs and all sorts of things forever. but this was a novel way of designing, creating, and importing data into a viewable form on a computer. So this next one here, what got it over the patent eligibility hump was basically the fact that it was a distributed network, and the prior art, or the previous way, the conventional way of doing this, was for it to be a non-distributed network. So rather than processing things locally and then sending them into a central area, everything would be processed in the first instance from that central area, and that ability to distribute the work of the accounting out to local servers saved the day there. And here are a few more of them. I'm not going to belabor this, but there's one here that's for self-referential database. And this one I think was really important because it points up the fact that when you're looking for something to make your idea patent eligible, you have to be addressing a problem that is unique to computers. In this case, what happened was they took the normal way of doing tables, which is you have table A, table B, table C, and they kind of condensed it all down into one self-referential table where new columns were actually defined by adding rows that define the columns. And that had never been done before. It was not conventional. And so they got their patent that way. This inertial tracking system for tracking the motion of an object relative to a moving reference frame, that was basically a system where initially the sensors would be located outside of, let's say, moving aircraft, and they moved them onto the moving aircraft. And that was considered to be not abstract. Then this last one down here is a method for animating lip movements that allows computers to produce accurate and realistic synchronization in facial expressions in animated characters. This could previously only be done by human animators. And the key to this one, I think, was that the way that the computer did this lip syncing, this animated lip syncing, was different from the way human beings would do it if they were to do it by hand. Maybe with their aid of computer, but they were doing it, mostly by sketching out the lip movements themselves on the computer. That the automated computer method just did it entirely differently, and because of that, it was patent eligible. So those are some. So here's some key takeaways from this. It's a software patent is eligible if it improves the way the computer functions, and we saw that with that self-referential database, where you're defining, where the table defines new columns in the rows. That was not conventional, and it actually made the database faster. It also made it able to be updated in real time. You could actually define a new row in real time in your database, which normally you would have had to take offline and rebuild it and then relaunch it. You could actually change it in real time. Those were big changes, and that was considered patent eligible. If it executes a process in a new way that is different from the conventional way it is done without the computer, or maybe even with the computer, but it's a new way. You can actually show it's new and hopefully improved. If you've done it a different way, you haven't done it in order to degrade performance. You've probably done it to improve performance. And the two examples I use here are the lip movement animation method and the inertial tracking system with the sensor on the platform versus on the ground. So, I know this is a lot to take in. It's probably not enough for you to go out there and start writing your own software patent applications. But it is something that, to get you sensitized to thinking, okay, I'm developing this software. I wonder if there's some way that I can say that improves the way the computer itself works, or that I can say, this isn't the conventional way of doing things on the computer. And if you can articulate either of those, you may have something that's patentable there, or patent eligible. Probably need to see a patent attorney about it, but at least you've got some ideas there. I'm going to talk briefly about products of nature and natural phenomena, because this is kind of where I live. I'm a chemist, and we have to deal with things like products of nature and natural phenomena quite a bit. And there may also be folks who are working in the diagnostic industry or medical devices, and they may be concerned about some of these issues. So let me move on here. Products of nature are not patent eligible, and this basically means plants and minerals in the same form as they're found in nature, and compounds extracted from living things. And a really good example of this is just DNA. Speaking of gold rushes, there was a gold rush around the time of the Human Genome Project, where everybody was patenting every piece of, they were using what at the time were new, but they were quickly becoming conventional processes to identify new stretches of DNA that coded for important proteins, and they would file patent applications on the DNA, the complementary DNA, the RNA, and the proteins that they all encoded. And that gold rush went along for quite a while until the Supreme Court got a hold of it and said, no, DNA is not patent eligible. And however, complementary DNA, which is synthetic, is patent eligible. So there's kind of an interesting thing there, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. Having a product of nature as part of your invention does not bar patent eligibility necessarily. Non-naturally occurring mixtures containing natural products can be patent eligible. The caveat is that they have to do more in combination than they do separately. Novel uses of compounds. You might have heard of a little compound called paclitaxel. It's sold under the brand name Taxol. It's naturally occurring. It's extracted from the bark of the yew tree. It's incredibly toxic to cancer cells. It's slightly less toxic to non-cancer cells, but you can, the use of it as an anti-cancer agent is patent eligible, or was patent eligible when it was applied for. And also, when you prepare that as an intravenous infusion, as it is, then and it has certain ingredients in it that are not naturally occurring, that also is patent eligible. So I mentioned before, complementary DNA or cDNA is patent eligible because it's basically it's not found in nature in that form. And then artificial microorganisms. That was a case that we had the quote from, anything under the sun made by man. That case was Diamond v. Chakrabarty. And that also, the artificial microorganisms are patent eligible. So things like nude mice and whatnot. Anytime you have a recombinant type of microorganism, a lot of the microorganisms that, for instance, are used to make lysine and other amino acids in bulk are patent eligible. So here are the key takeaways for natural products. Modify it, do something to it. Maybe you extract it from from a plant or something like that. You isolate it, it has certain properties. You can put it in a combination and maybe use it as a natural supplement, or as a pharmaceutical. You can also chemically alter it, and that chemical alteration will make it patent eligible. Use it in a new way. If it's maybe described in say the ancient Chinese literature as being useful for treating gout, but if you can use it to treat the common cold, and that's not described in the literature, that also is patent eligible. Another thing is you can get a patent on the process of extracting it from nature. That process itself is not naturally occurring, so it's at least patent eligible. It might be obvious, but that's a different section of the law, but at least it's patent eligible. Natural laws, these are tricky because in a sense, every patent takes advantage of some natural law, whether it's the law of gravity, whether it's friction, whether it's action on a lever or something like that. There are natural laws kind of behind everything we do. So what are we talking about with natural laws? Well, what we're worried about is a claim or a patent that does nothing more than recite a natural law and then say apply it. Let's say if we tried to, and this one has been hard on the diagnostic industry, because normally what they're doing is they're finding, hey, this antibody binds to this thing, and that thing is important for this disease. So if I put an antibody in there and detect this thing, that indicates there's a disease. Well, that's nothing more than applying the natural law, at least the way the courts have interpreted it. Now, that's very, I have to say, that's very controversial, and but it's kind of seeped into the patent law, and it's been steeped into the patent law enough that it's going to be very hard to extract that. So what do we do? Well, first off, let's talk about some things that aren't patent eligible. Things like detecting a coding region, detecting coding region alleles by detecting linked non-coding region. You're detecting one thing by detecting something else, not going to be patent eligible, because you're, in the eyes of the court, you're just taking advantage of a natural law that, one thing, if you detect one thing, it indicates another thing is there. It's kind of harsh, but it's, but that's the law. A method of detecting, again, detecting paternally inherited cell-free fetal DNA in a maternal plasma and serum. The interesting thing here is that they found that a fetus's DNA actually ends up in the mom's bloodstream. So instead of having to do an amniocentesis, you can actually extract blood from the mom and find out if the baby has certain problems. Let's say they have a trisomy. That's something that they can cause Down syndrome and other kinds of problems. They can detect that early by testing the mom's blood. So you don't have to do an amniocentesis. This is a major discovery. This is huge. But unfortunately, the way it was claimed was nothing more than detecting and reporting. Detecting and reporting by itself, not patent eligible. Sad, but true. At least if you're in the diagnostics industry. Now, Dolly the cloned sheep was not patent eligible because it was determined that because Dolly was reproduced through more or less natural means. It wasn't really natural means, but the problem was that she was cloned. And so she didn't differ in her genetic structure from the original sheep. Now, to me, that's questionable. I doubt she was an exact copy. I'm sure that there were things that were different about Dolly the sheep, but they weren't able to articulate them. And so those who tried to get a patent on Dolly the cloned sheep failed. Here are some other ones. If you're not in this area, I apologize because this is going to be a little arcane, but primer pairs used for detection of a mycobacterium where they were ineligible because they're a natural phenomenon. The problem with these primer pairs was just like the DNA, which is naturally occurring, the primer pairs themselves, they didn't differ from the naturally occurring DNA. And so they were deemed to be not naturally occurring. Now, I would quibble with that as a chemist. The primer pairs are generally a lot shorter than naturally occurring DNA, and they're, I would say that they're not really naturally occurring, but this is what the court said, and so, quibbles aside, that's the rule. If the sequence of the primer pairs doesn't differ from naturally occurring DNA, you don't get a patent. And methods for diagnosing, again, we've got a method of diagnosing something, and you're basically detecting something. Diagnosing something by detecting something, not patent eligible, if that's all you claim. This one down here at the bottom is really odd. It's a recent case that came out, and this was in the automotive industry. And I guarantee you that patent attorneys in the automotive industry never thought that they would get this rejection. It's a method of balancing drive shafts by inserting a tuned liner into the drive shaft. Why was it held to be patent ineligible? Well, some clever litigator figured out that all they were doing was applying Hooke's law. Now, I couldn't tell you what Hooke's law is. It has something to do with dampening a vibrating thing. In this case, it would be a drive shaft. So they stuck some things inside of it to kind of dampen it. I think the problem with the claim was in the sense that it was claimed too broadly, and that it probably should have been more focused on the exact process used to tune or dampen these drive shafts. But this is one I guarantee you, if you're practicing in this area, mechanical arts, you never thought you would see this rejection, and here it is. So it just goes to show you, it doesn't matter where your invention lies. If you're too, in a sense, if you're too cute, if you're too nuanced about how you claim it, you probably are going to run. Now, you may run afoul of this provision in the law. So here's some natural laws. These were found to be patent eligible, even though they were challenged. This one is related to the previous one we talked about with the cell-free DNA. This one actually was a way of preparing a DNA fraction from a pregnant human female for analyzing a genetic locus involved in fetal chromosomal aberration. Why is this one patent eligible and the other one, which was just detecting and reporting, why is this one patent eligible? Well, part of it is because it was a method of preparation. And generally, if you can express it as a method of preparation, you're gonna be in much better shape than, because you're actually doing more than just detecting and reporting. You actually have to manipulate something. That was part of it. Part of it was that they were separating out parts of the DNA that were not very helpful for detection, and focusing in on parts that were helpful for detection. I think that may have helped as well. But I think the biggest part was this method of preparation, and those are going to tend, notwithstanding the previous case about the inserting the liners. If you state it right, if you state it correctly, you can get over that patent eligibility hurdle. Method for producing cryopreserved hepatocytes, I won't talk much about that. Improved cardiac monitoring device is not an abstract idea. That's interesting, because what does a cardiac monitoring device do? It detects and it reports. But part of what got them over the hump here again is this device worked differently than your average doctor. It didn't just do what doctors do. It actually did it a new and different way. And I think that was key to, and you'll see here that some of these natural law, or these patents that are challenged as being application of natural law, kind of overlap with the abstract idea. You know, these things aren't necessarily all that easy to articulate, and sometimes they tend to end up in the, you know, being stuck in, let's say we stick them mentally into the natural law category, but they could easily go into the abstract idea. And you do the same thing to overcome those types of problems, the patent eligibility problem, by focusing in on something that wasn't done previously. It's not conventional. And here are a couple of interesting ones. Method of treating schizophrenia by administering a particular drug depending on the liver enzymes, okay? So you have to find out what the patient's liver enzymes are, then you treat them. I think because this is a method of treating a human, or a method of treating potentially a human, I think this one gets over the hump pretty easily. But it was challenged on patent for patent eligibility because it was an application of a natural law, which is basically if you have more of this particular enzyme in your liver, you need more of the drug, because that enzyme can really chew up the drug and make it less effective. This next one down here is administering larger than naturally occurring amounts of, in this case, beta alanine, which is a naturally occurring amino acid. It's one of the amino acids your body uses to make proteins. But taking a large amount of it was deemed to be patent eligible. I think maybe if it had just said, taking beta alanine, first off, they would have had problems with prior art. But I think what got it over the hump there was simply that it was much larger than normal, and it's not, those are not naturally occurring levels of beta alanine. And then finally, this last one here is treating pain with oxymorphone based on creatinine clearance rates. That's a lot like this one up here. You have to detect what the patient's ability to clear the oxymorphone from the bloodstream is, and then you correct for that based on those numbers. So here are the key takeaways, I would say. If it's clearly just an application of natural law, then you're not going to get your patent. Well, if it's not just an application, if it's just observation and reporting results, there has to be there's got to be a tangible result that comes out the other end of it. And also, if you have a non-conventional improvement over the previous methods, then you can get a patent. If it's just a conventional, if you're just doing it the same way, let's say that cardiac protection device, if it just did what doctors normally do, but it did it automatically, maybe not patent eligible. It probably not. Anyhow, so thank you for your attention. I don't know if we have any questions. Julie, I really haven't been watching for questions, so if there are any.
I don't see any questions.
Okay.
However, if anyone does have any questions, you can email myself or Matthew. And you can stay tuned for next week. We have another webinar on patent novelty and non-obviousness. So these are they're super informative, especially if you're thinking, you have an idea, you want a patent, or you just have questions. And again, we will be posting these videos to webinars. So if you know someone who missed today's webinar, don't worry, you can actually go on and view it. And all Matthew's information and his email is on there as well. So you'd be able to contact him with any questions. So thank you so much. It was good to see you, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, Julie.